Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nick Dakin-Elliott, and I'm the person here at Villa La Pietra responsible for the greenery outside. But in this moment, I'm representing our director here, Ellen Toscana, who's out of the country this week. And so I want to just give a few general points and then a very brief introduction to the event. First thing is, can I ask you all to turn off those cell phones? Okay, in terms of introduction, our director asked myself and my colleague Nancy Lewinsky to organize a conference which is the final event in a series of events celebrating the bequest that Sir Harold Acton made of Villa La Pietra to New York University. So it was actually 20 years last year, and there's been a year-long series of events, and this is the last one. And it's the first event in a series which will be done in association with the Expo here in Italy. And I think that you'll find the day reflects both things. In terms of what we've inherited here, Chip will talk about the concept of the villa estate. One of the things that is interesting to me very personally is the passion that it requires to make something like this, and Sir Roy will be taking us through that. Susan will be talking much about the joy, the difficulty of managing such a venture. Mauro is going to be our link man between the past and the future, in that he is taking stock of cultural landscapes and talking about how they might be developed, protected in the future. And then our hope for the future is in the hands of Ari and Kim Wilkie in the afternoon. So we hope that these chosen speakers will reflect these two, the past, the present, and the future, the two opposites. But above all, in all of this, the thing that we who work here at Villa La Pietra have been very conscious of for a long time is what an incredible place Villa La Pietra is for anyone who wants to study many of the issues which are now very topical: sustainability, food, the environment. Villa La Pietra has been here for a very long time and has operated almost as a self-sustaining unit, and it's interesting as an historical factor, and it's interesting in terms of inspiration for the future. So lots of food for thought, a little bit of food to actually sustain us at lunch break, and I hope above all you find it an interesting and enjoyable day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello and welcome. My name is Nancy Lewinsky. I'm an art history professor here. I'm a landscape architect and horticulturist. I want to thank everyone for coming today and welcome you to our beautiful campus. Now that Nick has told us all to turn our phones off. Today at NYU, we're enjoying the product of a lot of hard work. Nick is in charge of, as he said, everything green here, which is an understatement. 56 acres. It's a lot of work, and I think he does a brilliant job, and I want to thank him for all his hard work he's done to put the conference together. And also the people that he works with, the numerous gardeners, some of the students. I teach a class here called Gardens and Landscapes of Tuscany, and we try to use the garden as much as possible. Because it starts in February, our course, we're not always able to go out there, but we do presentations in the garden. We try and analyze different villas, and we really enjoy working on this campus. I really try to, hopefully in my class of 25 or so, to convert at least one person to becoming a landscape architect, environmental scientist, change them from their finance majors if I can. Not easy to do in today's day and age. So our conference today is examining the Tuscan villa in order to explore its secrets of longevity. why we're still interested in villa life, the idea of otium, the Roman idea of leaving your city dwelling or your suburban dwelling and going off to enjoy nature's bounty in whatever that might be for you, a villa, a cabin, a small, trailer on the seaside. But what we want to be thinking about is, why is it so sustaining? Why has this concept lasted so long? Why is it so important to people, to your soul, to feeding your soul and helping the environment? These are some of the things we're going to look at today that's been going on, since the Gardens of Babylon for the Egyptians. And as for those of us in the room that are landscape architects and designers, we're still working with people today with their dreams, with their goals of creating their own Villa La Pietras on some level. So I'm very excited to be part of this conference, and I want to introduce our first speaker, Professor Chip Sullivan. And my students are familiar with his books. He's a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, Department of Landscape Architecture. He is an artist and landscape architect, and he's maintained a lifelong commitment to exploring the potential of the garden to create sustainable environments. Early in his career, he developed a series of experimental gardens that reinterpreted traditional garden forms, applying classical and historical design elements to contemporary landscapes. He's the author of numerous books, Drawing the Landscape, his beautifully illustrated Gardens and Climate. He won the Rome Prize, American Academy in Rome Prize in '85, started his research then that ultimately resulted in this award-winning book. He's written a book called Daydreams of Frascati, and a wonderful book that he wrote with Liz Boltz, his wife, The Illustrated History of Landscape Design, which we also use in our course. He has a new book coming out called Cartooning the Landscape, and I'm sure he'll make some references to that. I met Chip when we were working together at UC Berkeley. And we got this crazy idea, we didn't know each other, that we would take our students for the summer, we're not talking 5 days, 6 weeks on the grand tour of Italy. Neither of us spoke Italian, neither of us are very good with money. And we had 16 fantastic students. We had the most wonderful time. It was a life-changing experience. And I'm truly honored and pleased to welcome this wonderful man and my very dear friend, Chip Sullivan. He's going to talk to us about the Italian Renaissance Villa Estate, a sustainable model. So please welcome Chip.
This is my biggest fear, is coming halfway across the world and not having anything. My generation believes in slides, and now this generation believes in nothing. A jump drive, there's nothing there. So thank God I'm here. and this is here. So this is a miracle. But first off, I want to thank Nick and Nancy for having me here. This is a fantastic place. I haven't been back to Italy in 7 years. And Lucia, who said, we have an attic apartment for you. And I got there Tuesday night, and I opened the door, and oh my God, the sun was setting. There was the Duomo, and then the sun was setting in western Tuscany. It was like, I couldn't believe it. It was magnificent. And then I spent yesterday, I filled up a sketchbook of 60 drawings, walking through the gardens, feeling like Sir Harold Acton was following me behind and communing with him. So it's been a good start, and hopefully it will continue. So anyway, don't pay any attention to that man behind the curtain. I want to take you on a little bit of a journey on how I came at this idea of studying how the garden can be a sustainable device. And this idea sort of ignited to me when I was in college, and if you all remember the first energy crisis, it was a terrifying thing when we realized how dependent we were on foreign oil. And one of the things that I was thinking is, well, maybe landscape architecture can be a way to kind of get us out of that dilemma. 40% of our budget in America goes to heating and air conditioning of buildings. So I thought somehow landscape architecture could provide a way out of that. But I moved to Florida, South Florida, because I felt like the vegetation grows quickly. It's a lush tropical environment, and I felt like, well, I could really develop a practice based on this. But the solution for the energy crisis was to make buildings more and more kind of self-contained. They outlawed windows. High schools and junior colleges and elementary school were being built without windows. They outlawed jalousie windows. You weren't allowed to open windows. And as a result, you had these horrible glass structures as a solution to the energy crisis, which really terrified me and pissed me off, to say the least. I was lucky enough when I was at the University of Florida to study under a man by the name of Howard Odum, who wrote this book called Energy, Power, and Society. And he developed this ecological, environmental, energetic analysis of the landscape, which I thought could provide a key to this. The image on the right is energetic land use analysis of South Florida, where he was able to track the flow of energy from the sun by giving it kilocalorie values and evaluate the production of different ecosystems. The darker the red, the more energy intense it is. The darker the green, the more energy productive it was. So what I wanted to look at is that he developed these energetic land use diagrams, these diagrams that could chart the flow of energy through ecosystems, and each different ecosystem had a different kilocalorie net gain. So what I was thinking about, how can I apply this to landscape design? How can I create landscapes that have a net energy gain instead of a net energy loss? And I looked at this thing where, like, the garden has incredible potential to solving these problems. I think the potential is limitless with garden design and what we can do with it. So while I was in school, as a senior in the undergraduate degree for landscape architecture, I was horrified to read that like 8 million acres were being lost a year to photosynthetic production, and that atmospheric pollution was increasing dramatically. This was before acid rain. Remember acid rain? Whatever happened to that? Somewhere in, like when I was little, maybe in Life magazine, I saw this diagram that kind of illustrated the web of life in a tree. And this made me really think this is really powerful stuff. So what I tried to do, because I wanted to know everything that I put into the landscape, what it was doing, how it was working, I developed this ecological evaluation score for trees where I could relate and study and understand how much oxygen production trees were providing, how much water transpiration trees were providing, the wildlife production, what was providing food for wildlife and water transpiration. And I figured I could use this in assembling Odum's ideas into creating ecological systems that could provide a net energy gain. So I wrote an article about it for Landscape Architecture magazine, and that kind of got me going and thinking. But when I graduated, before I graduated, I had read an article in a magazine or a book, I can't remember, that was talking about the Anasazi Indians in the Southwest, specifically Pueblo Bonito, that the whole structures in Chaco Canyon were oriented to the sun, that they were perfect solar collectors, and that they had measured the temperature variations over a year in one of these enclosed rooms, and it didn't vary more than 10 to 15 degrees, just because of the solar orientation. So I went out to the West to specifically study this and learn how this was done. This is long before, the Anasazi had been discovered. Like now, and I guess you have to get used to it, every 5 years there was a recession. And maybe this is good, maybe this is bad, but the only place I could find a job was in Miami, Florida. We're a large corporate firm, and I would do projects like this during the daytime. It wasn't really exactly what I wanted to be doing. I really wanted to be exploring how I could create new ecosystems with landscape architecture. So I would go home after work, I would take a nap, I'd get up, make a pot of coffee, drink it, and then work on my own work till 2 and 3 in the morning. And these were sort of the things I was exploring, is like, how can I recombine these landscape architectural elements into creating passive microclimates? If I'd only called it sustainable design, I'd be, I could retire. But, we called it passive design, which is dumb. I missed the whole boat, But the great thing about working in Coral Gables, I couldn't afford to live in Coral Gables. I lived in South Miami, but Coral Gables was set up as a Mediterranean village in the 1920s during one of the great economic building booms. But there were all of these examples of kind of garden devices throughout. One of the terrible things about teaching, well, maybe it's good, students get younger every year, and when you show pictures of yourself, there's a certain point where students go, "Is that you?" That's me, So I like that look, but So, so every 2 weeks I'd get a migraine headache from staying up all night. So I would try to sneak out of the office before lunchtime because there's all these political groupings of who's going to go out to lunch with who, and I just wanted to go out and sleep. So I would find these places where I could sleep in the hot, Miami is hot. And I found this place that I could take a nap. It was really comfortable in the hot summer, and I started to look at it and wonder why. For one thing, there was a small little opening on the solid wall in the direction of the prevailing breezes, so the air picked up velocity as it moved through the small opening, and it was underneath an arbor, and there was a nice little bench where I could take a nap. So I would sleep for an hour every day and then go back to the office, and nobody knew any difference. But this started me thinking about passive design. One of the things that happened was, for some reason, some of the guys in the office said, "Chip, will you take us out on the weekends and teach us how to watercolor?" And I go, like most men would do, "Yeah, of course." I'd never watercolored before in my life. I had to figure it out, like on the fly, nothing by trial by fire. But one of the nice things about Miami is there was the Villa Viscaya, which was designed by an Italian architect and landscape architect when there wasn't a Miami. There's also Fairchild Tropical Gardens, which is the greatest collection of tropical plants, I think, in the world. And you could get year-long passes to both of these places. So we would go in watercolor, and I learned how to watercolor pretty quickly somehow. This long before I ever thought I would be teaching. But I found through watercoloring, especially the Villa Viscaya, there were places that were comfortable. Like this grotto on the left, which I always thought was the weirdest looking thing I'd ever seen. But when it's like 92 degrees and 90% humidity, you'd go inside here and it was 10 to 15 degrees cooler because the walls were dripping with water. Water was splashing on your ankles. The walls were thick, so it stayed cool. And this really made me begin thinking about alternatives towards enclosed glass box air conditioning. The thing on the right is something I didn't know what the hell it was. But I remember that gets like 3 or 4 days in Miami, it will actually freeze, and the wind will blow really badly. And I remember we were there that weekend, and I went into this space, and it was hot and toasty. And this is what I realized was later as a giardino segreto. So I had this brilliant idea, and this is what I was calling my work, Energy in the Garden. But I had this brilliant idea that I was going to write another article, and I would propose that the villa and garden in history, the garden was only a beautiful appendage to the villa. It only existed as an object of beauty. And then I was going to say, and I, Chip Sullivan, is going to show how that can be changed around, and the garden can be used as a passive microclimate. That was my hypothesis. But the important thing about hypotheses is you have to start somewhere, even if they're usually wrong. Because when I started doing my research, I read Georgina Mason's book, Italian Gardens, and I got Edith Wharton's Italian villas in their garden. And on almost every single page, she was talking how the Italian garden was designed to create passive, not necessarily passive microclimates, but shady places to walk, warm places to be in the winter. Almost every garden she described talked about how they were designed to be comfortable spaces. And I went, aha, that's what I was looking for. So I began with Pliny the Younger's letters, trying to do illustrations. One of the things he talks about is orienting this pergola near a cool spring water where the water goes underneath a marble bench, which is nice and cool, and then this wonderful water trough where you could float bottles of wine. And then he talked about something else really simple, is that the loggia should be oriented to the south and solid on the north side to block the cold northern breezes. It should be open to the south to collect the cool summer breezes, and that it should be high enough so that in the wintertime the sunlight penetrates and it acts as a solar collector, and then in the summertime it is in shade. And this is so basic. These principles were so basic. So I did finally write an article for Landscape Architecture magazine, but it changed where I wasn't talking about how smart I was, but just attributing to history. This was my studio in Rome. I'll never forget this. I just wanted time to work, and not get a migraine every 2 weeks. And I got my keys went into my room, and I said, oh, this is a great room. And then I found another key, and I'm walking up the stairs, walking by all these giant architect studios and artist studio, and I get to the attic again, go down into the room and open the door, and here's my goddamn studio. I was petrified. I couldn't even, here I am looking down at the city of Rome. It was unbelievable. Louis Kahn, when he was there, he went to sleep for a month. I said, well, I'm not Louis Kahn. I'll just sleep for a week. So what I did is to work my way out of that funk is I always carry a sketchbook, and I just started drawing gardens, just drawing the things that I saw. And I found the trick that worked for me was when I would visit a garden and I found a place that I might think is comfortable, I would sit into that space and just begin drawing it, and then I would begin to analyze it and find out how the different things were working. I also had a temperature gauge and a wind gauge to study how the different features might be working. And while I was there, for some reason, I was lucky enough to be contacted to write these 2 books. I did 2 videos for something that was like the southern version of This Old House, where we talked about passive design. The first thing I had to do was write these 2 little booklets that shamelessly would be sold with the videos when they showed the movies. But that was the beginning of sort of the research. But I have to talk about this. Nancy always talked about the hortus conclusus. And when we did our first trip, she talked about, oh, Belcaro, we've got to go to Belcaro. And the miraculous thing about this was that it's outside of Siena, but it's this miraculous sort of like metaphorical spiritual journey where you get out of the car, you wander through the woods, you come to this gate, and you knock on the door. You might get in and you might not. And this was like a very interesting sort of metaphorical thing. And then you walked in and here's this perfectly beautiful interior garden that the hortus conclusus was also like for vegetables and also for medicinal plants. But it's beautiful. And the weird thing is I've been trying to go back there since, and it's been closed for like 10 years. I've never, and I don't know if it's like the Brennadu, that movie where, like, you know, somewhere in Scotland there's a bridge every 100 years that opens up and you can go back 100 years. I don't even know if this place exists because I've never been able to get in again. So maybe it was just sort of a metaphor. So my wife, Elizabeth, she was asked to teach a class in the history of landscape architecture for Davis, and she was busting her ass putting this book together, and I really admired how much work she was putting into it. During this time, I was writing a series of comic strips for Landscape Architecture magazine on creative thinking. So Liz and I went to this conference where my publisher had a desk, and I said, Liz, I got this idea. I'm gonna pitch it to my publisher. Let's do the first graphic novel of landscape history. And she goes, no, I'm not ready. And she goes, plus, it's not a novel, but it is. Right? I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So like I went in the doghouse for a couple weeks. But the publisher goes, that's a good idea. Like, why don't you take 2 months and write a proposal and we'll look at it. So we went back. A week later, I got a call from Margaret, and she goes, you know, the more I thought about it, that's a really good idea. Can you put together a book proposal in a week? We have a meeting. And I said, no, but we will. So we did it. But the idea here was that when you look at history books, there's lots of photographs and images that are disconnected. So we wanted to do something where we storyboarded the landscape, and we wanted to do visual narratives that took you through the landscape as you would view it. And also, we always hear about these great texts, like the Romance of the Rose, but what the hell's in it? You know, or the Polyphilia, you know, or the Dream of the Red Chamber, all of these great texts that had a big effect on the history of garden design. So I wanted to illustrate those. And one of the ones I'm showing here is the Romance of the Rose, which you always see quoted. But in getting into kind of creating a vocabulary, the medieval garden is sort of the basis for the Italian Renaissance garden. Because for one thing, it's an enclosed space, it's metaphorical, it's symbolic, it has water reservoirs, it's about water conservation, it has orchards, it has vegetables, it has all different kinds of systems of growing different vegetables, it has places to sit, and it has all these religious metaphors. It also is a wildlife sanctuary if you look at the medieval paintings. So what I tried to do is take those wacky axonometric medieval paintings and recreate what a space like this might look like. The other thing we wanted to do, that just I want to touch on it, but the villa, especially the Medici villa, was the place where the Platonic Academy met at Carigi, and I think that's really phenomenal. So what I tried to do is have all of the intellectual people walking through the gardens, talking. The garden is just not a place of beauty and sustainability, it was also a place where history was changed. So it tried to illustrate how that might happen. So when I found hundreds of examples about how gardens in history acted as passive microclimates, how do I put that together? So I came across this idea of using the Platonic solids as a way of dividing up all of these historical devices and organize them in that way. So I started with Earth. The Platonic solid for Earth is a cube, and I also like the personification for that is Bacchus. You know, when we harvest the fruits of the earth, and I love this painting by Caravaggio where you have the first fruits. I remember being at the academy, and always there would be a bowl of fresh fruits with the water dripping. They had washed it all off, and and this painting by Leonardo da Vinci is supposed to be, I think, St. John, but it's really Bacchus. And below left on left, I'm trying to come up with a cartoon series to kind of, so I've gotten as far as Earth as a superhero, but that's as far as that got. But anyway, one of the things that the Earth is about is the Earth seat. The Earth seat is a really cool device where you're taking the ground that we used to sit on as kids and elevating it to a bench, using the Earth as a way of cooling and planting aromatic flowers on it, so when you sit on it, it crushes and smells, but it's a way for adults to sit on the ground again. But the Earth seat is a really simple Earth device. Using Earth here at the Villa Rupert in Parma, shows where you can sit down into the Earth using the Earth as a cooling device with a overhead growth of oak trees to keep it in shade. Also on the lower left, carving into the Earth to make an Earth seat where you're actually sitting in the south face, using the Earth like a cave to keep you nice and cool. When I first started studying Italian gardens, I always thought the weirdest thing I ever saw was a grotto. And almost every Italian garden has a grotto. What the hell is a grotto? And then when I started to get into the symbolism of the grotto, it's essentially a cave. And that goes back to the beginnings of humans when we were sheltered in the earth by caves. But then I started to study the religious history, and the Zoroastrian religion is one of the oldest religions in time, and it's based on the four elements. But the grotto in the Zoroastrian religion, and I guess previous religions, is a very important thing because you have Father, Son, and Mother Earth, and the sun penetrates the earth and fertilizes the land. So it has this really incredible symbolistic thing to it that I think is really neat. It's also a very comfortable space to be in. You've all seen the face at Bermarzo, which says, I think it's from Dante, you give up hope, if you go in here. But if you give up hope and you go inside, you're rewarded with this wonderful, cool space that's actually an underground earth room with the eyes as oculuses and the tongue as a table and benches around it. But the best thing is when people are walking by, they can't see you, and you can make scary noises and scare the shit out of them as they walk by, and you can enjoy it. But this is simply an earth room. It's using the earth as a natural cooling device. One of the most intriguing ones is Capriola at the Palazzo Farnese, and it's the Grotto of the Deluge. It's a large space, which is where the family and the residents would stay in the summertime, have dinner, have lunch. But the interesting thing about this, and what's neat in Italy, they're starting to restore a lot of these devices that haven't worked for centuries. And every 20 or 30 minutes, why it's called the Garden of the Deluge is there's a large water feature in the center, and water just cascades down from the tufa rock at the top, smashing into the water and aerating the surface of the water and acting as a natural air conditioner. Also, there are these three long, deep tunnels that go into the earth that also act as natural air conditioning to take the cool air out and bring it into that space, which is usually 10 to 15 degrees cooler in the summertime. So it's a natural air-conditioned space. It's not glassed in and heated artificially. At Hadrian's Villa, there are 7 miles of cryptoporticuses, which I think is really neat. The only other place that has 7 miles of cryptoporticuses is Disneyland. Disneyland is built 10 feet off the ground, and Pluto and Mickey and everybody, I swear Hadrian and Disney are reincarnated. They're the same person. But the neat thing about the cryptoporticus is you can move through the hot summer in the cool shade. The image on the right is below the fish pond, which is also an interesting device. Most Italian gardens had fish ponds as fish hatcheries where they would grow the fish to eat. But you notice the openings on the left, so the cool air drops down. So the cool air off of the water feature would come down and go through these openings and further cool this underground space. And also, it's a shame that all the frescoes have disappeared, but all the frescoes are painted with underground water scenes. So you get the physiological and psychological sense of cooling in these underground spaces, which I think is pretty neat. And Georgina Mason talked about how at the Villa d'Este, which is right above Hadrian's Villa, a lot of these elements that Hadrian had developed had been recycled and put into the Villa d'Este. And she talks about these underground cryptoporticus facing the direction of the prevailing breezes would bring cool air into this tunnel, and then there would be open vents that would take it up into the rooms above. So you have a system of natural ventilation. Hot air rises, so you always have like a movement of air being moved in through these spaces and cooling the interior of the space. Now, why I'm showing this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I just think it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. This is at the Villa, the Villa Medici. And what's neat about it is I always thought this was tiny till I saw it. It's giant. And what it is, it's the Apennino, the spirit of the Apennino pushing down on a serpent's head, pushing water out of the serpent's head into a water body that's also a fish hatchery. Now, Ferdinand de' Medici was an alchemist, and this is sort of an alchemical sort of device in the landscape, which I think is neat because it's a rainmaker in a way, or a spiritual rainmaker. And in the back of it, when you walk around to the back, it turns into a giant dragon. But he designed this to kind of recreate this idea of the spirituality of alchemy, where you go into the mine shaft of the earth and things are crude, and as you move up these rooms, it gets more and more sophisticated till you get to the brain, to the ultimate kind of mind growth. And he would disappear in here for weeks at a time and fish out of the eyeball of the Apennino. I just think it's interesting. Has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it's good to throw something cool in there. So, like, looking at this image on the left by Maxfield Parrish, which is more than enough reasons to buy Edith Wharton's book on Italian gardens. I think this is really a powerful image because we know what time of year it is. It's in the summer because the monk is walking in the shade and he's reading. He's meditating in the forest, which is the primal sense of humans. And also, what's working here is the way you make spaces cooler is contrast. So by contrasting the deep shade of the Bosco with the bright light of the central axis, you make the space cooler. When you go from a bright space into a dark space, it's psychologically cooling. And I like the fact that it's a spiritual exercise of walking through the Bosco. While I was at the American Academy, I found this old text describing the villas of Frascati. And there was a canon that described how they should be built. And I think this is an interesting idea in that the ratio of natural vegetation to the Bosco and the villa is very important, worked out. The natural Bosco is actually a wildlife preserve. You're not allowed to hunt in there, so you have this balance of wildlife and habitat. And also the other thing too is the spiritual sense of the Bosco represents the subconscious mind of humans, and also the evolution of the garden from this wild spirit as it comes closer to the house. The Bosco gets more and more formalized until it gets to the parterres and you get the facade. But you'll find most Italian gardens are connected to a Bosco. The siting of this is proper in that it's facing the south. The Bosco blocks the cold northern breezes, and the villas open to the south to capture the cool breezes as they move up towards us. I always thought these were really weird. This is the Pineum at, in Rome at, I can't remember. Oh yeah, the Borghese. And what the hell is this? Why are stone pines shaped like they are? They're umbrella pines. I could never figure that out till I realized how many people have eaten pesto. What's in pesto? Pine nuts. Where do they come from? Pine trees. The reason they're like this is to harvest pine trees. It wasn't until Nancy and I were driving around Tuscany and I could see all these white sheets out underneath the pine trees. And so easy, just wait for the pine nuts to drop. You don't even have to pick them up. But the other brilliant thing here is, like in America, we just cut the trees down when we need wood. Here, you just trim them up. You keep trimming up, liming them up, so you have this umbrella and it drops down. But what's neat about this is not only is most of the devices in landscape architecture, our vocabulary comes from agriculture, almost everything. Boscos, like trellises, pergolas. But what's neat about this is if you've ever been in a Bosco of pine trees when the wind blows, it's a symphony of music. Shh, you can hear that. And also when it heats up in the summertime, you have that smell of vanilla in the air. And this is incredibly wrong. At the Doria Panfilia where they planted grass, it should be sand, but you get the reflected light and the shifting light at the bottom, what gives you this really incredible feeling. Also, there's festivals. It happened once when I was in Rome, and all the Italian families were out underneath the trees. It was very cool. So the next element is fire. How do we use the garden as solar power? And the fire, the tetrahedron, and the personification of that is winter. And I just wanted to again talk about something I think is cool. Why do gardens have sundials? because the sun is really important. I thought these were really interesting, is that the villa was built with a sundial, and I think one of these actually, when clocks were built, they actually put the clock on, there's a clock and a sundial just in case the clock doesn't work. But it's to see where the sun is really important. We have to know where the sun is. It changes throughout the year. So Hadrian's Villa this Hadrians Walk is really another neat solar device. As you know, like in Italy, the passeggiata is really important. In America, there's no passeggiata, there's stairmasters. I walk by these gyms and I see people, like doing all this, and I think in Italy, people are just walking around. It's kind of like, you have to spend $100 a month to go walk. Here you can do it for free, but that's so important that Hadrian built a walk that he could use year-round. So like on the south-facing side, when the sun's lower, in the wintertime it'll be warm, and he walks on the north side in the summertime when it's hot. And it even had like sort of a cul-de-sac at the end where you could get and turn around. At the right is the Giardino Segreto, which is a sunken solar room. This is one of the first examples of solar architecture. It's buried into the ground so the cool breezes go over the top. It is just wide enough so that the sunlight penetrates and warms the space. Pliny the Younger loved to sunbathe, and he built it actually so he could sunbathe in the wintertime. Most Italian gardens have Giardino Segretos. This one on the left is Caponi, the Villa Caponi. And I finally was able to get into it. So it's so important that they actually have an underground tunnel that can take you from the villa into the Giardino Segreto. One of the nicest scaled ones is at Gambaraya, and what's neat about this is it's long and narrow, but it's oriented to follow the movement of the sun. It's also very cool because it's an outdoor room. It's connected right on axis with the central door. On the right is what I call the hot seat at the Villa Medici in Fiesole, which is western facing, so that when the Platonic Academy would meet for dinner or after dinner, this was a space that was designed to kind of like promote discussion. And this is at the Vatican in the little villa out back. That's in the wintertime. That's Trudy Schnockenberg, a poet, and she's sitting, notice where she's sitting. She's sitting in the sun. It's a hot seat. You've all been in the times of year when the sun's out and it's kind of chilly, and you've sat on a bench, a stone bench, and just the heat just warms your body. It's just the perfect temperature. So I call that a hot seat. This is the what I call a solar clock in the Boboli Gardens at the Isolato. What's cool about this is no matter what time of year, you can find a comfortable place to sit. In the wintertime, you can sit in the sun. In the summertime, you can sit in the shade, and you can migrate. This is the same. This is a green courtyard. The courtyards are designed for like walking and meditating, but I think it's a really good example of how you make green architecture that's also passive solar design. I want to show this image because to me, this is a solar pocket. And when we're talking about sustainability, to me, this is one of the ideal images of living and working in an agricultural landscape without destroying the agriculture. So you have the solar pocket, the little semi-courtyard's open to the south, but it's blocked on the north, east, and the west to block the wind, so you have a nice warm space to be in. Lake Garda, the images on the right show you the greenhouses that they put in glass in the wintertime, so it acts as a solar collector. They irrigate it at the top, and the water comes down from the top. And then they burn, in the wintertime when it's cold, they burn pots of fire at the bottom, and so it'll heat up the spaces. The Villa Medici in Castello has over 350 different varieties of oranges, lemons, and limes. I think that's fabulous. That's an amazing thing. You have an orange tree in your backyard, you can never eat enough oranges. To me, the oranges act like this is a well-designed orchard in a sense. This is the beauty of learning from gardens. We were there once, and the door was open to this little Giardino Segreto that is a small-scaled organic garden where they're growing food, which I thought was really cool. Gambaraya also has lemonia, which I think is really important. The thing about the lemonia is it's one of the first examples of passive solar architecture. It faces the south. All the lemonias face the south. The plants, they come in the wintertime, and the solar heat warms the space. Villa Palmieri shows you the importance of the oranges in that the lemonia is connected to the architecture, and that the little Giardino Segreto is connected to the building. So you have this perfect integration of architecture and landscape architecture. This is the Villa Giusti. I just wanted to show this because the grotto at the bottom once had mirrors in the back, so it looked like the grotto went right through the hill. And when they would have festivals, they would light a fire in the grotto at the top so that you'd walk in and the monster would be breathing fire. And at the end of the festival, when you were leaving, they would shovel the coals out so it looked like it was a fire-breathing dragon. So the last topic is air, the octahedron. And to me, this is one of the most important things, is designing and orienting spaces to capture the summer breezes. As I said before, the arbor was one of the first devices to integrate architecture and landscape architecture. The arbor is essentially a place to grow vines, and especially grapevines. The Villa Medici also has one of these grape arbors that's interesting. It's south-facing so that during the wintertime, they cut the vines back and take the arbor off so it acts as a perfect solar collector. This idea of air at the bottom, at Capriola, at the Palazzo Farnese, you have these, what I call air seats, these little projections out, so you're capturing the cool air as it rises up, and it acts as a natural cooling space. The allée is fantastic, because it's essentially 2 rows of trees planted together to create a shady shaft of coolness. Gigiano at the left, you can see it's a place to take the passeggiata. These are also oriented to take the prevailing breezes and direct them into the buildings. Villa Gori is basically an agricultural villa, but they have these 2 wonderful pleached alleys, which is where you take 2 trees and pleach them together to make these tunnels. And you would put a raganaya at one end to capture the birds. In the Italian fashion, I think it's really, Nancy and I discovered one of these places when we at Gigiano, where instead of going out and walking around the woods and hunting, the Italians build a little circle, they sink it in the ground, and they sit there drinking wine and eating pasta, and when the deer go by, they just shoot them and sit down and drink. So yeah, kind of neat. So the wind. Europeans understand the wind. We don't in America, but the Tramontana, the Scirocco, the Mistral, all of the directions of the wind bring different things. If you've seen Au Chocolat, the magic woman comes in with the wind and she's going to leave with the wind. The wind is much different here. And each direction has brings a different malady. Finally, water. This image by Maxfield Parrish talks about the moods of water, but water can also be used to cool our microclimates. One of the most important things today, I think, is saving every drop of water that falls on the ground. It's incredibly important. When Nancy and I were measuring Gigiano, we discovered that there was a giant cistern and directly next to the vegetable garden and fruit growing. So you have this combination of beauty and function. Like almost every villa should have. I think there's actually a cistern here. This is an Iranian deal that I think is pretty neat. Drip irrigation never works. It's always broken. So what they do is they take these unglazed pots and place them in the ground and fill them full of water so transpiration kind of oozes out, and it always works. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Water channels in California, we have like hundreds of miles of channels of water, taking water from the north to the south. We lose 40% of that water to transpiration. So in Iran, they just put trees on either side. God forbid leaves would fall in it, but they're fruit trees, and you reduce the amount of water transpiration. There's a description in Norman T. Newton's book on Design on the Land where he talks about the Villa d'Este late in the afternoon with the sound of water actively acting as a passive air conditioner. The Ovato at the back, you can't go in there now, but there's a bench where you can actually sit behind this waterfall and look out. And then the Walk of 1,000 Fountains is constantly spilling and splashing you and acting very, very comfortably. The Dragon Fountain, there's something called water banisters, so when you walk down the stairs, you can put your hands in the water, and these arcs of water that come on every now and then, you can actually walk in a like a structure of water. And if the sun is just right, you're in a room of kind of rainbow. Pretty phenomenal. So I'm finished with the giochi di acqua, which is, I think, I like the Italian sense of humor. So on the right slide at the right, at Torre Giniani, when you're standing outside, the jets come on and force you into this little forecourt. You dry off, and then out of the mouths of like 4 hydra, giant shots of water come out and drench you again. So you take refuge inside the grotto. You're drying off. You think you're finally dry again. It's called the Grotto of the 4 Winds. And out of the mouths of the 4 winds, you get another gigantic spray of water. You get wet again. You dry off and you go, where the hell is the water going to come from next? And then Flora, and nicely at the top, out of all of her flowers, you get drenched again. The image on the left is kind of neat because in Hollywood there's a group that does nothing. It's called wet downs. If you watch a movie, no one's ever arguing in the street in the rainstorm. It's always after the rain. There is a psychological thing about ionization, when negative is positive. And it's this idea of why we're attracted to water, and it's negative ionization creates this mood. Negative ionization right before rainstorms is also the most creative time to work. So the idea is that these giochi di acqua are kind of creating negative ionization. They're also wetting down the walks, and it dries off, and you walk through the garden. And also, I just love the different jokes that the Italians can pull on you. Montaigne talks about traveling through Frascati and getting drenched at every garden, soaking wet at every garden, changing their clothes every time, finally getting to the big garden house where they're going to spend the night, getting fed lots of food, and especially ice cream and brandy. And they go to bed in a hot summer night, and then they wake up with a stomach ache at 4 in the morning, freezing to death because the Italians opened all the air vents and pull all the cool air from the grotto, comes in and freezes them in the middle of the night. I think that's justification. So all these things came together in my book, Garden and Climate. How did we pull these things together? How do they come together? When I was finishing up Garden and Climate, I had a fellowship at Bellagio. And people were asking me, what the hell are you doing? And I would use the villa as an example. I'd say, well, look, the building's blocked on the north side. It's built into the north wall. The bosco at the top blocks the cold northern breezes. Look, the sunlight's penetrating the space. There's grottos for the summertime. It opens to the south. All the cool breezes come up from the south and keep the space cool in the summer. So when I finished there, they gave me a book on the history of Bellagio, and when I got back to America, I was looking through it, and I realized that Pliny the Younger actually had written his letters in this very spot. So it's ironical that I finished my book where I started looking, where Pliny the Younger's letters kind of turned me on. So in summary, ironically, this is where I was when I started. This is a brand new building in New York City that's supposedly platinum LEED. It's considered to be a perfect example of architectural sustainability, which I think is, well, I don't know, I won't say what I think. On the right, to me, is an image that I think we should cherish because to me, this is what demonstrates what landscape architecture can do. It's a desolate landscape and it's being turned green by design. It shows the positive force that landscape can have on the impact of reversing these negative things that we're having in the landscape. Finally, to me, the garden is a constant source of knowledge and meaning. I can't believe that I'm always learning something new. To me, this image shows you the idea of the portal, the gate, that there's something to go through, the journey that I took, started with the garden, and I'm still learning from the garden. I really think our way to a sustainable future is to look back at the past. It's really simple, and I think the Italian villa is a blueprint for the future that can reverse sort of the environmental degradation that's taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chip. I just want to ask does anyone have any questions? We have we're a little bit behind, but if anybody has any questions,
I'm out of breath.
He warned me. Well, the students are writing this up, but we had 2 people writing up this talk. Yes. Okay. And we can also ask questions during the break or towards the end of the day, because that was possibly a lot to digest.